Witness this. September 12, 1897, 3:15 in the afternoon. A 19-year-old signalman named Gurmukh Singh stood at a heliograph station inside a burning fort, hands working mirror keys while smoke filled his lungs. His fingers were blistered from the metal. His uniform was soaked in blood that wasn't his. Yet, behind him, through a wooden door already starting to crack, he could hear his brothers dying. Rifle fire, screaming, the wet sound of steel finding flesh. He had a choice: run to help them, or keep sending. He kept sending. His message to Fort Lockhart, 6 miles away, flashed in mirror code across the valley. Gate failing, breach imminent, perhaps 20 men left. This may be final signal. The reply came back in reflected sunlight. Understood. Destroy equipment. Attempt escape through rear exit. Gurmukh Singh read it. Looked at the small back door 15 feet away. Looked at the heliograph. Looked at his hands on the keys. Then he sent 4 more words that would be recorded in British military logs and repeated in Sikh regiments for the next 127 years. Will not abandon post. He didn't destroy the equipment. He cleaned the mirrors, made sure the next message would transmit clearly. The door behind him splintered. He picked up his rifle. That's when the screaming got closer. This wasn't heroism. This was the sound of math becoming murder. Before we dive into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy the hidden truths of history, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. To understand why a 19-year-old chose a heliograph over his life, you have to understand what September 12th had been for the previous 8 hours. But first, kill the version you think you know. The story gets told like this. 21 brave Sikh soldiers fought 10,000 tribal warriors and held their ground to the last man. Inspiring, heroic, completely useless as history. Here's the version that won't fit on a motivational poster. 21 men got trapped in a communications relay station they couldn't defend, fighting an enemy they couldn't defeat, because the British Empire ran its frontier on a budget and somebody had to pay the bill. On September 12, 1897, the bill came due. The place was called Saragarhi, not a fortress, not a strategic position, a relay station. Think of it as a cell tower built from stone in 1896, sitting on a ridge between 2 actual forts that couldn't see each other directly. Fort Lockhart to the west, 6 miles. Fort Gulistan to the east, 6 miles. The ridge topology made direct line of sight impossible, so the British built Saragarhi in the middle to flash messages using mirrors and sunlight. Heliograph technology, military Wi-Fi for the 1890s. The station cost 8,000 rupees to construct. The British staffed it with however many men the manual said you needed to operate signal equipment and defend a box made of stone. The manual said 21, so 21 it was. Standard garrison, standard assignment. The kind of post where nothing happens for months and then something happens very fast. September 12th was the fast part. Havildar Ishar Singh saw it coming first. 35 years old. 15 years in the Sikh Regiment. Promoted to Havildar 3 years prior. That's sergeant in British terms. Commander of Saragarhi's tiny garrison. On the morning of September 12th, he was at the heliograph station running the routine morning signal check with Fort Lockhart when he saw the dust cloud. Miles out, barely visible. Could have been anything, livestock, travelers, wind kicking up dirt. Except Ishar Singh had spent 15 years on the frontier. He knew what dust from 10,000 men looked like. It looked like math that didn't work. He kept the heliograph operational, but didn't send the alert yet. First, he counted his men, 21, all present, counted his rifles. 21, Lee Metford bolt actions, effective range 600 yards, rate of fire 10 to 12 rounds per minute in trained hands. He had trained hands, counted his ammunition, 400 rounds per rifle, standard load, 8,400 rounds total, one emergency crate in reserve, counted his walls, 15 feet high, decent firing positions, one wooden gate facing north, one small postern door facing south, counted his water, enough for 2 days if rationed, counted his food, irrelevant given what was coming. Then he counted the dust cloud again. The number didn't improve. He sent the signal to Fort Lockhart. Large tribal force approaching from northwest. Request reinforcement. The reply came back in mirror flashes within 2 minutes. Reinforcements unavailable. Hold position. Acknowledge. Ishar Singh stared at that message for 5 seconds. Reinforcements unavailable. That's bureaucratic language for, you're already dead, we just don't know when. He acknowledged. Then he walked the perimeter once, slowly, checking every firing position, every weak point, every angle. His men watched him. They knew what the dust cloud meant. They'd all fought on the frontier. The youngest was 19, the oldest was 42. Average age somewhere around 28. Every single one of them could do basic arithmetic. 21 men, 8,000 rounds, unknown number of hostiles approaching. The math only worked if the hostiles stopped coming. Hostiles never stopped coming. One of the sepoys, younger soldier, made a joke. Something about target practice. Nobody laughed. Another started checking his equipment twice, 3 times, compulsive repetition. Ishar Singh saw it. Fear manifesting as ritual. He'd seen it before. Hell, he'd felt it before. He walked over to the man, Sepoy Bhola Singh, 23 years old, 2 years in service. Ishar Singh put a hand on his shoulder, said nothing, didn't need to. They both knew. The whole garrison knew. By 9 in the morning, everyone at Saragarhi understood they were the morning shift at a relay station about to become a graveyard. The British imperial logic that put them there went like this. The northwest frontier stretched 1,500 miles of hostile terrain, separating British India from Afghanistan. Pashtun tribes controlled most of it. Heavily armed, deeply committed to removing foreign forts from their ancestral lands, and operating under a warrior code called Pashtunwali that made surrender culturally impossible. The British had maybe 30,000 troops to control the whole frontier. The math didn't work. It never worked. So the British did what empires do when the budget doesn't match the mission. They optimized, built strings of forts at strategic points, garrisoned them as lightly as doctrine allowed, and prayed the gaps didn't matter. Saragarhi was a gap, a necessary gap, because keeping Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan talking to each other was worth more than the lives of whoever operated the relay. That's not cruelty. That's just imperial cost-benefit analysis with human variables. The tribal force approaching Saragarhi that morning numbered somewhere between 10,000 and 14,000 men. Mostly Orakzai and Afridi tribesmen. Not a mob. An army. They'd been organizing since August, coordinated uprising across multiple tribes, triggered by 2 things: new British fort construction on tribal lands, and a religious call to jihad by local mullahs. The British intelligence apparatus in Peshawar knew something was coming. They'd underlined words like concerning and monitor in reports. They hadn't known when or where. First attacks hit Malakand in late July, then spread south. Now it was September, and the wave had reached the Samana Ridge. Saragarhi sat right in the middle. Why hit a relay station? Strategic logic. If you want to take 2 forts, first thing you do is blind them. Cut their communications. Make them fight isolated. Then you've got 2 separate targets instead of 1 coordinated defense. Saragarhi was the eye-connecting Fort Lockhart's brain to Fort Gulistan's muscle. Kill the eye, the body goes stupid. The tribal leaders understood this. They weren't savages throwing themselves at stone. They were experienced fighters executing a plan that made perfect military sense. Remove the relay, then assault the main positions while they're deaf and blind. At 9:30 a.m., the first shot cracked across the valley, not from the Sikhs. They were saving ammunition. A ranging shot from the tribal line, testing distance. The bullet hit stone, sprayed chips. Ishar Singh watched the impact point, calculated the angle, estimated the range. About 800 yards out. Jazail long rifles. Effective range 600 yards, accurate to maybe 400. The shooter was ambitious or showing off. Didn't matter. What mattered was the signal it sent. We're here, we're coming, and we're not asking you to leave. We're telling you you're already gone. Ishar Singh turned to his men. 20 faces looking back at him. Young faces mostly. A few gray beards, all Sikh. All professional soldiers wearing dark blue turbans that marked them as 36th Regiment. All volunteers who'd signed up for 11 rupees a month as sepoys, 25 as havildar, and the knowledge that frontier duty meant exactly this kind of mourning. He could have given a speech, could have talked about duty, honor, the Khalsa warrior tradition, God's will, military discipline. He didn't. He just said 6 words. Make them pay for every step. That was the order. That was the strategy. That was the entire defensive doctrine for 21 men facing 10,000. Extract maximum cost. Make the math hurt. And when the math stopped working, which it would, make them remember they'd been in a fight. But to understand why that was fatal, why those 6 words were essentially Ishar Singh signing death warrants for his entire command, including himself, you need to understand what was about to walk out of that dust cloud. Not warriors in the abstract, actual men carrying actual weapons, operating under an actual code that valued honor more than survival. Pashtunwali, the ancient tribal law system, had rules. One of them was, resist foreign occupation. Another was, revenge is not optional, it's religious duty. A third was, surrender is permanent shame. The men approaching Saragarhi had been born into this code, raised by it, defined by it. They weren't fanatics. They were professionals doing what their culture had trained them to do for 2,000 years, fight invaders. The British were just the latest invaders. Before them, Sikhs, Mughals, Greeks, Persians. The Pashtuns had fought them all. The Pashtuns were still here. The tribal force spread across the plain like water-finding level, thousands of men in loose formation, moving with the kind of coordination that comes from shared purpose rather than drilled discipline. They didn't need officers shouting orders. They knew the target. They knew the job. Kill everyone inside. Take the position. Move to the next fort. It wasn't personal. It was housekeeping. At 9:45 a.m., Gurmukh Singh sent another heliograph message to Fort Lockhart. Enemy force estimated 10,000 plus, divided into multiple groups. Main assault forming north side. No reinforcement possible from our position. Awaiting orders. Fort Lockhart's reply, no orders. Hold as long as possible. Good luck. Good luck. 2 words that mean we have nothing else to give you except syntax and wishful thinking. Gurmukh read it. He was 19, youngest man in the garrison. He'd been assigned to signals because he was fast with the heliograph and had steady hands. Now those steady hands were holding a message that said, "You're on your own, die well." He didn't show it to the others. They already knew. At 10 a.m., The tribal force was 1,000 yards out and closing. The math was visible now. 21 rifles versus a horizon full of men with weapons. Ishar Singh did the calculation one more time, slower, hoping the numbers would change. They didn't. 8,400 rounds divided by 10,000 targets equals 0.84 rounds per enemy. Enough to wound most of them if every shot connected perfectly and nobody missed and rifles didn't jam and men didn't get tired and the enemy stood still and accepted bullets like gentlemen. None of those conditions would hold. The real math was simpler. They had maybe 6 hours of ammunition at combat rates. After that, bayonets. After that, nothing. The dust cloud had become a wave. The wave had become an army. The army had become math that didn't care about courage or duty, or the fact that 21 men in dark blue turbans had families 800 miles away in Punjab who were about to receive letters from the British Army saying, "Died in service, gallantly, holding his post." Ishar Singh looked at his men one more time, checked his rifle, loaded it. The first round chambered with a solid metallic click that echoed off stone walls. 20 other rifles chambered rounds in sequence. Click, click, click. The sound of men accepting what's coming. That's when the real battle clock started. Not when the first shot was fired, when the last choice was made. And the choice was, we don't run. Here's the story you've been told. Brave soldiers fought savage tribesmen on the frontier. Civilization versus barbarism. Order versus chaos. The British bringing light to darkness, defended by loyal colonial troops. That's the simplified version, the propaganda version. The version that survives because it's easy to repeat and makes everyone feel good about their ancestors. Kill it. The truth is harder and more interesting. 2 professional military forces collided on September 12, 1897, both operating under codes older than the British Empire, both absolutely convinced they were defending their homes, both willing to die for ground that neither truly owned. The British called it the Northwest Frontier. The Pashtuns called it home. And somewhere in the gap between those two names, men like Ishar Singh got handed rifles and orders and told to hold positions that mathematics said were indefensible. The frontier wasn't a line on a map. It was a 1,500-mile wound running from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea, separating 2 incompatible ideas about who owned what. On one side, British India, administered from Calcutta and London, governed by bureaucrats who measured success in tax revenue and railway miles. On the other side, tribal territories, governed by councils of elders, measured in honor and blood feuds and the ability to move through mountain passes your grandfather's grandfather had moved through. In between, a string of forts connected by heliograph stations, telegraph lines, and the perpetual optimism of imperial planners who believed technology could substitute for troop numbers. The British had built their frontier system like a supply chain, forts at strategic points, roads connecting them, smaller posts filling the gaps. The entire apparatus designed to control trade routes, suppress raiding, and project power into territories the empire claimed but didn't quite govern. It worked the way most imperial systems work, through the threat of overwhelming force if you challenged it, and the convenience of leaving you alone if you didn't. The Pashtun tribes had looked at this system and made a calculation. Some cooperated, some ignored it, some waited for the right moment to burn it down. August 1897 was the right moment. Ishar Singh had watched the frontier change over 15 years. When he'd first arrived as a young sepoy in 1882, the British presence was lighter, fewer forts, more negotiation. The tribes raided, the British retaliated, everyone understood the rules. But the 1890s had brought expansion, new forts pushing deeper into tribal territory, new roads, new taxes, new rules about who could travel where and when. The British called it pacification. The tribes called it invasion. Both were right. By 1897, the frontier wasn't simmering anymore. It was boiling. Ishar Singh could feel it in the way village elders stopped making eye contact at markets. The way young men disappeared into the hills for weeks at a time. The way weapons that should have been expensive started showing up in hands that shouldn't have afforded them. Someone was organizing. Someone was arming. Someone was waiting. The someone had a name, or rather, many names. Tribal war leaders, religious scholars, clan elders who'd decided the time for patience had expired. The British intelligence reports called it the Great Pashtun Uprising of 1897. The tribes called it housekeeping. What triggered it was simple enough. The British announced plans for another round of fort construction in the Samana Range, right through territories the Orakzai and Afridi tribes considered theirs by inheritance and God's will. The announcement came in June. By July, mullahs in villages across the frontier were preaching jihad. Not the corrupted modern version of that word. The original meaning, struggle, resistance, the religiously mandated duty to fight occupation. When Islam and tribal honor point in the same direction, you get force multiplication that no European power had figured out how to counter. The organizational structure was brilliant in its simplicity. No central command, no unified army, just coordinated intent. Village councils made decisions locally. Fighters gathered by clan and family. Weapons came from wherever weapons come from when you need them badly enough. Inheritances, smugglers, British supply convoys that got careless. The British were fighting an insurgency before that word meant what it means now. Every man aged 15 to 50 was potentially a fighter. Every village was potentially a supply depot. Every mountain pass was potentially an ambush site. You couldn't conquer that, you could only manage it. And in August 1897, the management failed. The first attacks hit Malakand and Chakdara in late July. Coordinated assaults on 2 British positions simultaneously. Thousands of tribal fighters appearing out of terrain the British thought they controlled. The garrisons held barely, but the message was clear. This wasn't raiding. This was war. By August, the uprising had spread south. More attacks. More forts besieged. The British rushed reinforcements from the plains, but moving troops through mountain passes in summer heat with hostile populations on all sides meant slow, grinding logistics. The kind of logistics that left isolated posts like Saragarhi exposed. The force that approached Saragarhi on September 12th wasn't a mob. It was a tribal lashkar, a war party assembled through traditional mechanisms that predated Islam, let alone the British. Gul Badshah, one of the Afridi war leaders, had put out the call. The exact process is lost to history, but the pattern was consistent. Messages sent through trusted runners, councils convened in villages, agreements made on the basis of shared interest and ancient alliance. The target was the Samana forts. The strategy was standard siege warfare adapted for frontier terrain. Cut the communications, isolate the garrisons, overwhelm them with numbers. Saragarhi was step 1. A relay station defended by 21 men versus a force numbering somewhere between 10,000 and 14,000 fighters. The British documents say 10,000. Tribal accounts say more. The actual number matters less than the ratio. It was enough to turn stone into dust if they were willing to spend the bodies, and they were willing. That's the part that European military thinking kept getting wrong. British officers looked at casualty ratios and saw proof of tactical superiority. 100 tribesmen dead for every British soldier killed meant the British were winning. Except the tribes measured victory differently. They measured it in forts abandoned, in trade routes disrupted, in the empire's ability to project power degraded. You could kill 1,000 Pashtun fighters, and the tribes would replace them with brothers and cousins and sons who now had blood debts driving them. The British had finite manpower. The tribes had kinship networks that functioned as infinite recruiting pools. Different math, different victory conditions. The men walking toward Saragarhi that morning carried Jazile rifles, swords, knives, and the absolute conviction that removing British forts from their lands was righteous work. They'd grown up in a culture where warfare was part of the seasonal calendar, where skill with weapons was a mark of manhood, where hospitality to guests and death to invaders existed in the same moral framework without contradiction. Pashtunwali, the tribal code, had rules. Defend your honor, protect your guests, take revenge for insults, resist occupation. These weren't suggestions. They were the operating system. You didn't choose Pashtunwali any more than you chose your blood type. You were born into it. You lived by it. If necessary, you died enforcing it. A British officer who'd spent decades on the frontier once wrote in his diary, "They are the finest light infantry in the world, brave to the point of recklessness, expert marksmen, masters of their terrain, and absolutely ungovernable." He meant it as a complaint. The tribes would have taken it as a compliment. The fighters approaching Saragarhi weren't united by nation or ideology in the modern sense. They were united by land and blood and faith, and the shared understanding that foreign forts on their ridges meant foreign control of their lives. Some were teenagers on their first raid. Others were graybeards who'd fought the Sikhs in the 1840s and the British ever since. They brought their own weapons, their own supplies, fought in family groups where shame in front of your cousins was worse than death. No uniforms, no parade ground discipline, just the kind of cohesion that comes from 1,000 years of cultural continuity and 3 months of coordinated planning. Their logic was simple. The British have 21 men in a stone box. We have 10,000 men and time. We take the box, we blind Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan, then we take those too. The math worked. The strategy worked. The only question was cost. How many men would die removing 21? The answer didn't matter enough to stop them. That's what the British kept misunderstanding. Imperial cost-benefit analysis said, if victory costs more than the territory is worth, don't fight. Pashtun cost-benefit analysis said, if the fight is righteous, the cost is irrelevant. Those two systems of meaning couldn't negotiate. They could only collide. Now the heroes. Except calling them heroes misses the point. They were professional soldiers doing a job they'd been trained for by a warrior tradition that made the British Empire look like a startup. The Sikhs weren't accidental warriors. They were purpose-built for it. Guru Gobind Singh established the Khalsa in 1699 with a specific mandate: create a community of saint soldiers who would defend the oppressed and resist tyranny. The 5 Ks, the articles of faith every baptized Sikh carried: uncut hair, a wooden comb, a steel bracelet, cotton undergarments, and a sword. Not metaphorical swords, actual swords. The symbolism wasn't subtle. You're a saint, you're also a soldier. Those identities don't contradict. They complete each other. When British officers first encountered Sikh armies in the 1840s during the Anglo-Sikh Wars, they found disciplined infantry that charged artillery positions and fought to annihilation rather than retreat. The British won those wars, barely, and immediately started recruiting Sikh soldiers for their own army. That's imperial pragmatism. If you can't beat them, hire them. By 1897, Sikh regiments were the shock troops of the British Indian Army. Not because they were loyal in the sense of loving the empire. Loyalty was transactional. The British paid well, treated Sikh soldiers with respect their own officers had learned was non-negotiable, and most importantly, gave them what the Khalsa Code demanded: righteous combat. The frontier provided that in abundance. Sikhs fighting Pashtuns wasn't about religion. It was about two warrior cultures recognizing each other as worthy opponents and proceeding accordingly. Ishar Singh had joined the 36th Sikh Regiment in 1882 at age 20. Standard recruitment. British officers visited Punjab villages, offered 11 rupees a month and a rifle. Young men signed up for money and glory, and the chance to fulfill their Khalsa obligations while getting paid for it. The training was British. The discipline was British. The esprit de corps was Sikh. That combination produced soldiers who could execute complex tactical maneuvers while simultaneously operating under a religious code that said retreat was spiritual failure. You can't train that. You can only recruit people who already believe it. 15 years of frontier duty had taught Ishar Singh things the British manual didn't cover. How to read terrain the way Pashtuns did. How to calculate ammunition expenditure not in rounds per minute, but in hours until you die. How to look at a defensive position and see not what the engineers promised, but what physics would deliver. Saragarhi's walls were 15 feet of stone, good for stopping rifle fire, useless against men with ladders and the willingness to climb them while getting shot. He knew that on September 12th. He'd known it when they assigned him to command the garrison. The British built Saragarhi for signals, not sieges. If 10,000 men wanted it badly enough, they'd take it. The only variable was time. The men under his command were the same mix every frontier garrison pulled. Some veterans, some new recruits, all Sikh, all volunteers. They'd grown up hearing stories about Sikh military history. The Battle of Saragarhi would become one of those stories, but they didn't know that yet. They just knew the math. 21 versus 10,000. The Khalsa Code didn't have a clause for unless the odds are bad. It had a clause for especially when the odds are bad. That's when fighting mattered most. That's when you proved whether the baptism meant anything. At 10:30 a.m., Ishar Singh gathered his men in the fort's small courtyard. The tribal force was visible now, a dark mass spreading across the plain. No more dust cloud, no more estimates. Just visual confirmation that everything they'd calculated was correct and insufficient. He looked at 20 faces, young, old, scared, calm, all waiting to hear what the commander would say when math said they were corpses who hadn't stopped moving yet. He said, "The British gave us orders to hold. The Khalsa gave us orders to fight. Today, those are the same order. We hold until we can't. Then we hold longer. No shame in dying, only in dying poorly. Questions?" Silence. Not because they had no questions, because the questions didn't matter. Will help come? No. Can we win? No. Then why fight? Because the alternative was dying while running, and men who wore the Khalsa uniform didn't run. That wasn't courage. That was cultural programming so deep it bypassed choice. You could no more run than you could stop breathing and expect to live. One of the younger sepoys, Bola Singh, asked anyway, "Havildarji, if we cannot win, what are we fighting for?" Ishar Singh looked at him, looked at the tribal force gathering like a storm system, looked at the walls, the gate, the heliograph tower where Gurmukh Singh was already preparing the next signal. Then he answered the only way that made sense to men operating under a code written 200 years before they were born. We're fighting so they remember it cost them. That was the mission statement. Not victory, not survival, just expense. Make them pay in blood for every foot of stone. Make them count bodies. Make them tell stories about the day they fought 21 men and needed 10,000 to win. Legacy mathematics, the kind that works backwards from death and asks, what does this corpse prove? The sepoys nodded. Some checked their rifles again. Others prayed quietly, lips moving through Japji Sahib, the morning prayer. Ishar Singh watched them and understood something the British officers who'd given him this assignment never would. These men weren't brave. They were faithful. Bravery is a choice. Faith is a condition. You don't choose to believe. You just believe. And when belief says fight, you fight. When belief says die here, you die here. The British had accidentally recruited a garrison of men for whom retreat wasn't cowardice. It was apostasy. By 11:00 a.m., the tribal force had moved within a mile of Saragarhi and stopped, not attacking yet, organizing. Ishar Singh watched through gaps in the stone. He could see groups forming, leaders gesturing, weapons being distributed, standard pre-assault coordination. They were professionals. They'd done this before. They were treating Saragarhi like a tactical problem that required solution, not a target that required hatred. That made them more dangerous. Angry mobs make mistakes. Organized armies just grind forward. Fort Lockhart sent another heliograph message at 11:15. Enemy strength confirmed. Estimate 12,000 total. Saragarhi, Fort Gulistan, and Fort Lockhart all targeted. No reinforcement possible from any position. Destroy sensitive materials. Hold as long as tactically feasible. Acknowledge. Tactically feasible. That's officer language for, we know you're dead. We're just asking how long until it's official. Ishar Singh acknowledged. Didn't destroy anything. What sensitive materials? A signal log and some personal letters? The only thing in Saragarhi worth destroying was the garrison itself, and the tribal force was already planning to do that. Gurmukh Singh, 19 years old, 2 years in service. Hands steady on the heliograph keys, sent back a message that wasn't in the manual. Will hold, will signal progress, will not surrender post. Fort Lockhart's reply was 3 words. Understood. Godspeed. Out. The heliograph went silent. Across the valley, 6 miles west, British officers lowered their telescopes and made notes in logs that would later become official reports. They could see Saragarhi from Fort Lockhart's walls. Small stone structure on the ridge, dwarfed by the tribal force surrounding it. They couldn't help. They could only watch and document and wait for the heliograph to stop flashing. At 11:30 a.m., the tribal force began to advance. Not a charge. A methodical approach in multiple columns, using terrain features for cover, spreading wide to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Textbook siege tactics adapted for mountain warfare. 300 to 400 men in the first wave, thousands more behind them. The math was overwhelming, and it was walking closer. Ishar Singh checked his rifle one final time. Loaded. Safety off. He looked left, looked right. 20 rifles ready. 8,400 rounds of ammunition distributed. Walls manned, gate barricaded, water rationed, every man at his position. This was it. The moment where theory became physics, where faith became action, where 21 men would try to hold a stone box against an army, not because they could win, but because the alternative was unthinkable. The first tribal fighters crossed into effective rifle range, 500 yards. Ishar Singh raised his hand. 20 rifles tracked targets. The range closed. 400 yards. 300. His hand stayed raised, steady, waiting. 250 yards, still waiting. Make them close. Make every round count. 200 yards. His hand dropped. 21 rifles fired as one. The first volley hit like physics made audible. 21 rifles firing simultaneously at 200 yards. Controlled, disciplined, British military doctrine executed by men who drilled this exact maneuver 1,000 times. The sound rolled across the valley, echoed off stone, faded into the mountains. In the 2 seconds of silence that followed, approximately 15 tribal fighters fell. Some killed instantly, others wounded, crawling back, screaming. The rest scattered, diving for cover behind rocks and low ground, returning fire with missiles that cracked and boomed but mostly hit stone. Ishar Singh didn't celebrate. He counted. 15 hits out of 21 shots. Good percentage. Meaningless mathematics. The tribal force had just learned what Lee Metford rifles could do at 200 yards. Now they'd adjust, and there were still thousands of them adjusting. The battle's first phase wasn't chaos. It was a negotiation conducted in gunfire. The tribal fighters advanced in loose groups of 50 to 100, using terrain expertly, moving from cover to cover. When they reached effective rifle range, the Sikhs fired controlled volleys. Men fell. The survivors retreated, regrouped, tried different approaches. It was tactical problem-solving happening in real time with human bodies as the data points. The Pashtuns were testing the defenses, mapping the kill zones, identifying which firing positions were most dangerous, calculating how many men it would cost to close the distance. Professional work, the kind that requires experience and discipline and the willingness to treat your own casualties as learning opportunities. For 90 minutes, from 9:30 to 11, the pattern repeated. Advance, volley, retreat, regroup. The Sikhs fired in shifts, 4 men at a time while others reloaded, maintaining continuous pressure without overheating barrels or exhausting ammunition too quickly. Ishar Singh rotated positions, moving along the walls, checking sight lines, correcting aim, conserving rounds. He wasn't fighting yet. He was managing a resource depletion timeline. 8,400 rounds at the start. After the first hour, maybe 7,800 remaining. Tribal casualties, somewhere between 25 and 30 visible bodies. Sikh casualties, none. The math still worked. Barely. But the math was always going to stop working. That's what Ishar Singh understood that morning in a way his men maybe didn't yet. Controlled volleys work when the enemy respects your range and takes time to regroup. They stop working when the enemy decides time is irrelevant and range is just distance that can be crossed if you're willing to pay the toll. At 11 a.m., the Pashtuns stopped probing and started paying. The second wave came from 3 directions simultaneously, not hundreds, thousands. A coordinated assault designed to overwhelm firing positions through sheer volume of targets. This wasn't about tactics anymore. This was about human flood mechanics. If 21 rifles can engage maybe 30 targets per minute at maximum rate of fire, and 3,000 men are advancing at once, the mathematics becomes simple and terrible. You can kill and kill and kill, and the wave keeps coming because there are always more men behind the ones you just shot. Ishar Singh saw it forming and made a decision that would define the next 2 hours. He abandoned volley fire, told his men to fire at will, pick targets, maintain rate, don't wait for commands. That's what you do when military doctrine stops matching battlefield reality. You adapt or you die according to a plan that no longer applies. His men shifted immediately, no hesitation, because they understood the same thing he did. The controlled phase was over. Now came the desperate phase. The sound changed. Instead of synchronized volleys with gaps of silence between them, the gunfire became continuous. A rolling thunder that didn't stop. Lee Metford rifles firing, ejecting brass, loading, firing again. Hands moving on muscle memory. Aim became approximate. You weren't shooting at individuals anymore. You were shooting into mass. The tribal fighters closed from 800 yards to 600 to 400, and the Sikhs just kept firing. Men fell by the dozens. Others stepped over bodies, kept advancing. The calculus was brutal. Every minute the Sikhs could maintain this rate of fire cost the Pashtuns maybe 40 to 50 casualties. Every minute also burned through 200 rounds of ammunition. Both sides were spending reserves. Both sides knew it. The question was who'd run out first. At 11:30, the tribal force reached 200 yards, close enough that Jezile fire started hitting with accuracy. Bullets striking stone near firing positions, forcing men to duck, interrupting aim. The first Sikh casualty came at 11:42. Sepoy Ram Singh, 26 years old, 4 years in service, took a round through the gap between two stone blocks while he was reloading. Headshot. He dropped without sound. The man next to him, Sepoy Jeevan Singh, pulled him back from the wall, checked for pulse, found nothing, took his ammunition pouches, returned to firing. No ceremony, no pause, just resource reallocation. The dead don't need bullets, the living do. Ishar Singh saw Ram Singh fall, marked it internally. First death. Many more coming. He moved to plug the gap in the defensive line, took up Ram Singh's position, started firing. Led by presence. That's what commanders do when tactics have degraded to shoot until you can't. You show your men you're experiencing the same physics they are. By noon, 3 more Sikhs were wounded, not badly enough to stop fighting, but badly enough to slow them down. Sepoy Bola Singh took a round through the left arm, wrapped it with cloth torn from his turban, kept firing with his right. Sepoy Narayan Singh got hit in the leg, propped himself against the wall, kept his rifle working. Pain was data, the body reported. You acknowledged it and continued. That's what training does. It doesn't make you brave. It makes you functional past the point where untrained men would stop functioning. The ammunition count was dropping faster than Ishar Singh had calculated. By 12:30 p.m., they were down to maybe 6,000 rounds. That sounds like a lot. It wasn't. At current rates of fire, 6,000 rounds meant approximately 90 minutes of sustained combat. After that, bayonets. The tribal casualties were mounting too. Ishar Singh could see bodies piled in the approaches, 50 to 70 dead, maybe twice that wounded and pulled back. Those were real losses, significant losses. They also represented less than 1% of the attacking force. The Pashtuns could afford those casualties. The math still favored them. It always had. At 1 RPM, the tribal assault shifted tactics again. Instead of massed frontal approaches, smaller groups began moving along the base of the walls, using the stones themselves as cover from rifle fire. Smart, dangerous. It meant they were preparing for the next phase, scaling. Ishar Singh saw ladders being constructed from nearby trees, rough but functional. He redirected fire, tried to hit the ladder crews, but they were working in covered positions. You can't shoot what you can't see. And these fighters knew their terrain better than any British surveyor ever would. They'd grown up in these mountains. They knew every rock that could hide a man, every angle that created dead space. The first ladder hit the eastern wall at 1:30 p.m. Crude construction, logs lashed with rope, but adequate for the job. 3 men started climbing. Sepoy Uttar Singh, positioned above them, shot the first man at 15 feet. The body fell, took the second man down with it. The third kept climbing. Uttar Singh's rifle jammed, barrel too hot, mechanism failing. He grabbed a rock, waited until the climber's head appeared over the wall, smashed the rock down with both hands, skull fractured. The man fell. The ladder stayed in place. 2 minutes later, another group tried the same ladder. Same result, different bodies. This was the new equation. The walls had stopped being shields. They'd become the battlefield itself. The tribal fighters weren't trying to break through anymore. They were trying to get to the walls, onto the walls, over the walls, and eventually, through sheer numerical persistence, they would. That's not defeat talking. That's physics. 21 men can't defend every foot of a 15-foot wall simultaneously against hundreds of men with ladders and the willingness to climb over their own dead. Gurmukh Singh, still at the heliograph station in the interior room, sent updates every 15 minutes like clockwork. 1 caller PM. Heavy assault continuing. 2 dead. 5 wounded. Ammunition approximately 6,000 rounds. Holding. 1:15 p.m. Wall assault beginning. Ladders deployed. First hand-to-hand engagements. Still holding. 1:30 p.m. Multiple breach attempts. Casualties increasing. Ammunition critical. Still holding. Fort Lockhart acknowledged each message with the same 2 words. Acknowledged. Understood. What else could they say? They were 6 miles away, under their own tribal harassment, watching through telescopes as 21 men fought math that didn't care about courage. The British officers at Fort Lockhart were writing everything down: times, positions, tactics, casualties. The documentation was meticulous. The help was non-existent. At 2:00 p.m., the Eastern Wall breach succeeded. Briefly, 4 tribal fighters made it over the top simultaneously. Rushed the nearest defenders with swords and knives. Close combat. No aiming, just reflexes and violence. Sepoy Hira Singh took a sword cut across the chest, deep enough to see bone, killed his attacker with a bayonet thrust, collapsed. Sepoy Daya Singh shot 2 more at point-blank range, used his rifle as a club on the 4th. The breach was repulsed. Cost: 1 Sikh dead, 2 critically wounded. Gain: maybe 60 seconds before the next attempt. Ishar Singh pulled 3 men from less threatened positions, created a quick reaction force at the base of the eastern wall. That's what you do when your defensive line is stretched past capacity. You abandon the idea of continuous defense and shift to crisis response. Fires break out, you put them out. Breaches happen, you plug them, until you run out of men or they run out of will. The Pashtuns hadn't run out of will. They'd barely started spending it. The wounded were piling up. 8 men now with injuries ranging from minor to terminal. Sepoy Hira Singh, the sword wound across his chest, was still breathing but fading fast. The others tried to help him, pressure on the wound, water when he could swallow. He died at 2:20 p.m., quietly, eyes open, looking at sky. No last words, no dramatic moment, just biology asserting itself. The living moved his body to the courtyard, took his ammunition, returned to positions. That was the ritual now. Die, get moved, get looted for supplies, fight continues. War reduces humans to logistics problems that solve themselves. At 2:30 p.m., smoke appeared at the northern gate. Not gun smoke, wood smoke. The Pashtuns had piled dry brush against the wooden door, thrown torches. The gate was 15 feet of heavy timber braced with iron, but wood burns when you apply enough fire and time. Ishar Singh saw the smoke, understood immediately what it meant. The gate was the structural weakness, always had been. Stone walls don't burn, wooden gates do. Give them 30 minutes of sustained fire, and the gate would collapse. Then the breach wouldn't be a ladder climb over a wall. It would be a corridor into the fort's center, wide enough for men to charge through 4 abreast. That's when the math would accelerate from slow death to fast death. He couldn't stop the fire. No water to spare. No way to reach the gate without exposing men to direct fire from hundreds of Jaziles. So he did the only thing left, prepared for the breach. He pulled 6 men from the walls, positioned them in an arc facing the gate, fixed bayonets, redistributed the remaining ammunition. This was the final defensive position. When the gate fell, these 6 men would hold the opening. Not forever, just long enough to make it cost. The men he chose understood what the assignment meant. Sepoy Sundar Singh, 32 years old, 8 years in service. Sepoy Sahib Singh, 29, 6 years. Sepoy Lal Singh, 24, 3 years. Sepoy Bhagwan Singh, 27, 5 years. Sepoy Buddha Singh, 23, 2 years. And Lance Naik Chanda Singh, 34, 10 years, second in command of the garrison. None of them protested. None asked why them. They knew why. Because Ishar Singh needed his most reliable soldiers, at the point where reliability would be measured in minutes before death. That's not an honor. That's just the job. Chanda Singh, the Lance Naik, looked at the burning gate, looked at the 5 men beside him, said 4 words that summarized everything about Sikh military culture in one sentence. Make the doorway narrow. He didn't mean physically narrow. It was already narrow. He meant tactically narrow. Make it so only the front rank of attackers could engage. Kill them fast. Let the bodies pile up. Turn corpses into obstacles. Make every foot of forward progress require climbing over the dead. That's how 6 men hold against hundreds. Not by winning. By making victory expensive enough that the price becomes the point. The gate burned. The heat was intense enough that men 30 feet away could feel it. Smoke filled the courtyard, choking, stinging eyes. The defenders' wet cloth, tied it over their faces, kept their positions. At 3:00 p.m., parts of the gate started glowing. At 3:15, the first boards began to fail, splitting, collapsing inward. At 3:20, a section the size of a man's torso fell away. Through the gap, daylight, smoke, and behind it, hundreds of faces waiting. Ishar Singh checked the ammunition one more time, 3,000 rounds remaining. Divided by 17 men still combat effective, that's about 175 rounds per soldier, enough for maybe 45 minutes at reduced fire rates. After that, steel and stone and bodies. He didn't announce the count. Everyone could do the math themselves. They'd been doing it all morning. The math kept getting worse. It never got better. Gurmukh Singh sent his 3:15 p.m. update. Gate burning. Preparing breach defense. Ammunition 3,000 rounds. 8 dead, 6 wounded. Still holding. Fort Lockhart's reply was longer this time. Saragarhi, you have exceeded all expectations. Permission granted to destroy heliograph and fight to conclusion. You have already won. The Empire will remember. Gurmukh read it twice. Permission to die. That's what that message meant, wrapped in formal language and tactical courtesy. But still, permission to die. He didn't destroy the heliograph. Not yet. As long as he could signal, Fort Lockhart would know they were still fighting. The heliograph was proof of life. He'd keep it running until his own life stopped running. At 3:25 p.m., the northern gate collapsed, not gradually, all at once. The support beams failed under sustained heat. The entire structure came down in flames and splinters, and the sound of wood dying violently. Dust and smoke billowed inward. When it cleared, there was a gap 8 feet wide and the full height of the wall. Open. Exposed. A corridor directly into the fort's center. On the other side of that gap, Thousands of warriors who'd been waiting hours for exactly this moment. For 5 seconds, nobody moved. The Pashtuns stared at the breach. The Sikhs stared back. Both sides understanding that what happened next would be measured in bodies, not time. Then the first tribal fighter screamed a war cry and charged through the opening. He made it 3 steps before 3 bayonets caught him simultaneously. Chest, gut, throat. He died mid-scream. His body hit the ground and didn't move. The second man through tried to jump over the corpse, got shot twice before he landed, collapsed on top of the first body. Third man, fourth man, fifth man, same result. The 6 Sikhs at the breach were operating on pure trained reflex now. No thought, just mechanical violence. Thrust, withdraw, reset, thrust, shoot, work the bolt, shoot. Every motion drilled into muscle memory years ago, executing now without conscious input. Bodies piled up fast. That's what happens when you funnel hundreds of men through an 8-foot gap that's defended by soldiers who know they're dead anyway. The attackers couldn't stop. The men behind were pushing forward. The men in front couldn't retreat. They could only die or kill. Most died. Some killed. Sepoy Lal Singh took a sword thrust through the ribs, kept fighting another 20 seconds, killed 2 more men, fell. The 5 remaining Sikhs closed the gap in the line, kept the rhythm. Thrust, shoot, thrust, shoot. The breach became a machine that converted human bodies into corpses at industrial rates. By 3:35 p.m., there were 15 to 20 bodies clogging the gateway. The Pashtuns had to literally climb over the dead to get through. Some tried, got shot climbing, added to the pile. The defenders were using corpses as fortification now. The dead protecting the dying. Ishar Singh watched from 10 feet back, rifle ready, waiting to plug gaps in the breach defense as men fell. Because they would fall. They were falling. Sepoy Sundar Singh, bleeding from a dozen cuts, collapsed at 3:38. Sepoy Sahib Singh took over his position, lasted 4 more minutes, got pulled down by 2 attackers who'd made it through, died fighting. 4 defenders left at the breach, then 3, then 2. At 3:45 p.m., Lance Naik Chanda Singh, 10 years of service, second in command, stood alone at the breach with 1 other sepoy beside him. Behind them, Ishar Singh and the remaining garrison members. Maybe 10 men still combat capable. In front of them, a gap full of corpses, and behind those corpses, a force that hadn't stopped trying. Chanda Singh looked at Ishar Singh. No words, just a look that said, "This is it. This is how it ends." Ishar Singh nodded, understood, picked up a sword from a dead Pashtun warrior, walked forward to stand beside Chanda Singh at the breach, the Havildar and the Lance Naik, commander and deputy, standing in a doorway full of dead men, holding steel, waiting for the next wave. That's when the eastern wall collapsed, not from fire, from sustained damage. Hours of men climbing, rocks being thrown, structural stress accumulating. The stone gave way with a sound like thunder. A section 10 feet wide just fell inward, and suddenly there wasn't 1 breach anymore. There were 2. The trap had crystallized into something simple and final. 21 men had become 12. 1 breach had become 2. The ammunition was nearly gone. The walls were failing. And outside those walls, thousands of warriors who'd spent the last 6 hours dying by dozens were about to spend the next hour dying by hundreds while they killed 12 Sikhs in return. This wasn't going to be a battle anymore. It was going to be a massacre conducted in installments until the math resolved itself into silence. Ishar Singh looked at the 2 breaches, looked at his remaining men, made the last tactical decision of his life. Split the garrison, 6 men at each breach. No reserves, no fallback position, Just two groups of Sikhs standing in two gaps, fighting until biology made fighting impossible. He didn't explain the decision. Didn't need to. Everyone understood. When you run out of tactics, you run on faith. And faith said, die standing. The warriors poured through both breaches simultaneously. The first warrior through the northern breach died before his war cry finished. 3 bayonets found him in the same second, chest and gut and throat, simultaneous puncture. He made a wet, choking sound and dropped. The second man vaulted his body, got shot mid-air, landed dead. The third stepped on corpses, swung a sword, connected with Sepoy Sahib Singh's shoulder, severed muscle to bone, then took a bayonet under his ribs that punched through to his spine. Both men fell. The fourth attacker lived long enough to kill Sepoy Sundar Singh with a knife thrust that found the gap between ribs, then died when Lance Naik Chanda Singh crushed his skull with a rifle butt. The fifth, sixth, seventh died in sequence so fast they formed a pile. That was the first 30 seconds. The eastern breach opened simultaneously. 6 Sikhs positioned there, weapons ready, no time to think. The collapsed wall section created a 10-foot gap, and tribal warriors poured through like water finding an opening. Sepoy Bola Singh, left arm already wounded and useless, fired his rifle one-handed into the mass. Hit someone, worked the bolt, fired again. A sword came from his right side. He didn't see it. The blade took him across the neck, not clean, half severed. He dropped to his knees, tried to raise his rifle, couldn't make his arms work anymore. The light went out of his eyes while his body was still vertical. Sepoy Narayan Singh stepped over Bola Singh's collapsing form, fired 3 rounds point blank into advancing fighters, switched to bayonet work when they got too close to shoot. Thrust, withdraw, thrust. A Pashtun warrior with a sword got through his guard, slashed across his face, took his left eye and most of his cheek in one stroke. Narayan Singh screamed, not words, just rage and pain converted to sound. Kept fighting. Blind on one side, blood sheeting down his face, he killed 2 more men before a Jazile shot hit him in the chest and his lungs stopped working. This is what the breach fighting looked like from above, if anyone had been above to see it. 2 gaps in stone walls, both roughly 8 to 10 feet wide, both packed with human bodies in various states of dying. The Sikhs fought in tight arcs, backs to each other, creating overlapping fields of fire and steel. The Pashtuns attacked in waves, climbing over their own dead, using corpses as cover, pushing forward through sheer momentum and the knowledge that the defenders had to break eventually because they were finite and the attackers were not. The mathematics were simple. 6 Sikhs at the north breach, 6 at the east, 12 total. Maybe 300 rounds of ammunition left between them, against thousands of warriors who'd already demonstrated they'd spend 300 lives if that's what victory cost. The only question was timing. How long until the defenders ran out of bullets, ran out of blood, ran out of the ability to keep their hands wrapped around weapons? Ishar Singh fought at the northern breach beside Chanda Singh, both men shoulder to shoulder in the gap. No commands anymore, just reflexive violence. He'd picked up a sword from a dead Pashtun, was using it alongside his rifle. Shoot. Drop the rifle, sword work, pick up rifle, shoot again. His uniform was soaked in blood, his own and others. He'd taken cuts across both arms, a gash on his forehead that bled into his eyes, and something had broken ribs on his left side that made breathing feel like being stabbed from inside. None of it stopped him. Pain was information. Death was the only endpoint that mattered. At 4:00 p.m., roughly 30 minutes into the breach fighting, the ammunition situation became critical. Men were counting rounds, making every shot deliberate. Sepoy Uttar Singh at the eastern breach fired his last bullet, threw his rifle at an advancing warrior's face, drew his kirpan, the ceremonial sword every Sikh carried, started fighting with that. The kirpan wasn't meant for combat. It was meant for keeping articles of faith. But steel is steel, and edges cut regardless of symbolism. He killed 3 men with a religious artifact before someone shot him in the gut. He didn't die immediately. Sat down against the wall, hands trying to hold his intestines inside his body, watched his brothers fight for another 2 minutes before shock took him. The northern breach was holding through sheer accumulated corpse mass. The bodies piled so high that attackers had to climb a 3-foot mound of their own dead to get through. That slowed them enough that the defenders could shoot them while they climbed. But it also meant the Sikhs were fighting uphill now, stabbing upward at men above them, exhaustion multiplying with every thrust. Chanda Singh took a spear thrust through his left thigh at 4:15 p.m. The weapon punched through muscle, scraped bone, stuck there. He broke the shaft off, left the spearhead embedded, kept fighting with a piece of wood jutting from his leg. That lasted 5 minutes. Then blood loss and damage to the femoral artery made his leg stop supporting weight. He went down on one knee, couldn't get back up, kept his sword moving, killed 2 more men from his knees. A Pashtun warrior with an axe came through the breach, swung downward with both hands. The axe took Chanda Singh in the shoulder and neck, nearly decapitated him. His body fell forward onto the pile of corpses he'd helped create. Ishar Singh saw Chanda Singh die, saw the lance knight's body add itself to the mound, saw 3 warriors climbing over it simultaneously. He shot 2, ran out of ammunition, used his rifle as a club on the 3rd. The rifle broke. Stock shattered against a skull. He dropped it, drew his kirpan, and the sword that had been ceremonial his entire adult life became the only thing keeping him alive. 4 Sikhs left at the northern breach now, 4 at the eastern breach, 8 men total in a garrison that had started the day with 21. The courtyard behind them was full of bodies, 16 dead Sikhs, most of them piled where they'd fallen, stripped of ammunition but still present. The living fought surrounded by their brothers' corpses. That does something to a mind. Clarifies things. Makes the abstract concept of fighting to the last man into concrete physics you can see and smell. The eastern breach collapsed entirely at 4:30 p.m. Not the wall, the defense. 4 men trying to hold a 10-foot gap against hundreds finally reached the mathematical endpoint. Sepoy Jiwa Singh went down with a sword through his chest. Sepoy Jit Singh took multiple spear thrusts simultaneously, fell backward into the courtyard. Sepoy Dharam Singh fought with a broken arm, bone visible through torn flesh, got overwhelmed by 3 attackers working together. They hacked him down with methodical brutality. Sepoy Bhagat Singh, last man standing at the eastern breach, realized he was alone. Didn't retreat, just roared something incomprehensible and charged into the incoming warriors. Made it 6 steps before rifle fire from outside the walls cut him down. The eastern breach was open, undefended. Tribal fighters poured through, spread into the courtyard, started attacking the northern breach defenders from behind. The tactical situation went from desperate to indefensible in 30 seconds. Ishar Singh, fighting at the northern breach with 3 other men, heard the screaming behind him, understood immediately what it meant. He turned his head, saw 50 warriors in the courtyard, more coming through the eastern gap. Looked back at the 3 men beside him. Sepoy Bhuta Singh, 23 years old. Sepoy Daya Singh, 29. Sepoy Gurmukh Singh, 19. The signaller who'd left his heliograph to fight when the walls fell. Ishar Singh made eye contact with each of them, No words necessary. They understood. The fort was lost. The mission was over. The only thing left was how they'd die. He said 5 words, back to back, die standing. They formed a tight square in the courtyard, backs pressed together, weapons facing outward in all directions. 4 Sikhs surrounded by hundreds of Pashtun warriors who'd finally breached the defenses and were flooding in from 2 gaps. This was the last stand within the last stand, the final compression of 21 men to 4 men to the inevitable 0. The tribal fighters didn't rush them immediately, circled instead, wary. These 4 had killed so many that even in defeat they commanded respect, or maybe fear. The line between those emotions gets thin when you've watched 100 of your cousins die trying to take a stone box from 21 men. Someone shouted from the circle, in Pashto. The meaning was clear even if Ishar Singh didn't speak the language fluently. Surrender. Drop your weapons. You've fought well. It's over. Ishar Singh, blood-soaked, wounded in 6 places, barely able to stand, looked at the man who'd shouted. Then he raised his kirpan and screamed the Khalsa war cry. Jo bol so nihal, Sat Shri Akal. The 4 Sikhs answered together. Sat Shri Akal. That was the response. That was the defiance. That was 21 men reduced to 4 telling thousands. We don't surrender. We don't submit. We die on our terms. The circle collapsed inward. What happened next took 90 seconds and felt like hours. The 4 Sikhs fought back to back while warriors attacked from all angles. Sepoy Buddha Singh went down first, dragged away from the group by 3 men, stabbed repeatedly until he stopped moving. Sepoy Daya Singh killed 4 more attackers before a rifle shot hit him in the spine. He collapsed, paralyzed, still conscious, tried to crawl toward his sword. Someone shot him in the head. Gurmukh Singh and Ishar Singh, the youngest and the commander, stood alone now. 19 and 35, 2 years of service and 15. They'd started the day as signaler and havildar. They'd ended as the last 2 heartbeats in a garrison of corpses. They didn't speak, just fought. Gurmukh Singh had a rifle he was using as a spear, thrusting the bayonet at anything that moved close. Ishar Singh had his kirpan and a sword he'd taken from someone he'd killed earlier. Both men were wounded so badly that standing required active concentration. Blood loss made everything distant and sharp simultaneously. Adrenaline and dying were having a conversation in their bodies about which process would finish first. A warrior with a Jazail shot Ishar Singh from 15 feet away. The bullet hit him in the chest, left side, punched through ribs into his left lung. He felt the impact, felt the warm flood of internal bleeding, felt his left lung stop inflating properly. He staggered, didn't fall, turned toward the shooter. The man was reloading, working the mechanism. Ishar Singh threw his sword. The blade tumbled through air, hit the shooter handle first, didn't kill him but made him drop his rifle. Ishar Singh bent down, picked up a rock, threw it. Missed. Bent down for another rock and realized his legs weren't working anymore. He went to his knees, blood coming out of his mouth now, lung filling with it, drowning from inside. He looked up, saw Gurmukh Singh still fighting, back against a wall, surrounded. The kid was holding them off with a broken rifle, using it as a club. Still alive, still refusing. 19 years old and refusing to die lying down. Ishar Singh tried to stand, couldn't, tried to crawl. Managed 3 feet. His vision was narrowing, darkness closing from the edges. He propped himself against a wall, sitting position, facing the courtyard, picked up a rifle from a dead man beside him, checked the magazine. 2 rounds left. He chambered 1, raised the rifle, hands shaking so badly he could barely aim, saw a warrior running toward Gurmukh Singh from behind, fired, hit, the warrior fell, chambered the second round, another target, fired, missed. The rifle was empty. He dropped it, couldn't lift his arms anymore, couldn't breathe properly anymore, couldn't do anything except sit against stone and watch the courtyard become a charnel house. Around him, 50, 60 Sikh and Pashtun bodies piled together, impossible to count, impossible to separate friend from enemy in death. The courtyard floor was slick with blood, 3 inches deep in places, pooling in low spots. His vision grayed, then black, then nothing. Havildar Ishar Singh, 35 years old, 15 years in the 36th Sikh Regiment, commander of Saragarhi, died at approximately 5 p.m. on September 12, 1897, sitting against a wall with an empty rifle in his lap and 50 dead warriors within 30 feet of his body. He never saw how it ended. Gurmukh Singh saw how it ended because he was how it ended. At 5 p.m., he was the last Sikh alive in Saragarhi. 19 years old, 2 years in service, the signaller who'd stayed at his post until the post ceased to exist. He'd fought his way from the northern breach to the courtyard to the heliograph room, trying to reach the equipment, not to use it, just to touch it one more time. That room had been his station, his responsibility. Some part of his brain that still functioned past terror and exhaustion wanted to go back there. He made it to the doorway. The heliograph was intact, mirrors clean, mechanism functional. He could have sent one more message. Told Fort Lockhart it was over, told them how it ended. He didn't. What was there to say? You're watching. You know. He turned away from the heliograph, faced the courtyard. 50 to 60 warriors standing between him and the northern breach. More coming through both gaps. They'd stopped advancing, just stood there, looking at him. The last one, the youngest one, the one who should have run, should have hidden, should have done anything except pick up a rifle and walk back into the courtyard to die like his brothers died. He raised his rifle. Empty. He knew it was empty. Raised it anyway. Someone laughed. Not cruel. Just surprised. The kid still thinks he's fighting. The kid still thinks one more bullet matters. Gurmukh Singh didn't think one more bullet mattered. He thought dying alone mattered. He thought dying without witnesses from his own side mattered. He thought the last thing Fort Lockhart would see through their telescopes should be a dark blue turban, still vertical, still defiant, still Khalsa. He dropped the rifle, drew his kirpan. The laughter stopped. Everyone understood what that meant. He wasn't surrendering. He was transitioning weapons. A voice from the crowd, older man, speaking Punjabi with a Pashto accent. Boy, you fought well. Put down the sword. Walk away. You've earned it. Gurmukh Singh looked at the man, looked at the courtyard full of his dead brothers, looked at the walls they'd held for 8 hours, looked at the heliograph room behind him. Then he spoke the only words he'd say in the last hour of his life. I'm not a boy. I'm a soldier of the Khalsa, and soldiers don't walk away. He charged. 19 years old, wounded in a dozen places, exhausted past the point where exhaustion has meaning, carrying a ceremonial sword against 60 men with rifles. He made it 12 steps before the first shot hit him in the leg, fell to one knee, got back up, made it 3 more steps. Second shot hit him in the shoulder. He staggered, didn't fall, kept moving forward. Third shot hit him center mass, liver or kidney or spine, something structural. His legs stopped working. He went down, but he didn't stay down. He crawled, sword still in his hand, dragging himself forward, toward the mass of warriors, toward the northern breach, toward something he could kill before dying. They let him crawl 6 feet. Then someone walked up behind him, put a Jezile barrel against the back of his head, fired. Sepoy Gurmukh Singh, 19 years old, died at approximately 5:15 p.m. on September 12, 1897, face down in the courtyard of Saragarhi, sword still gripped in his hand, 6 feet from where he'd fallen, proof that even when the body fails, the Khalsa code doesn't. The battle was over. The courtyard went silent except for the sound of men breathing hard and the wet sounds of the wounded dying slowly. The Pashtun warriors didn't celebrate. They just stood there, looking at what victory had cost. Bodies everywhere. Blood everywhere. The stone walls pocked with bullet holes and scorched black from fire. 2 breached walls, 1 burned gate. And scattered across the ground, 21 Sikh corpses that had required 8 hours and somewhere between 180 and 600 Pashtun deaths to create. A tribal elder, one of the war leaders, walked through the courtyard slowly, stepping over bodies, looking at faces. He stopped at Ishar Singh's body, propped against the wall, eyes open, rifle in his lap. The elder stared for a long moment. Then he said something in Pashto that the men around him understood and repeated. The translation, as it would later be recorded. They were lions. All of them. That was the enemy's verdict. Not cowards, not fools, not men who died badly. Lions. The highest compliment one warrior culture could give another. It didn't make the deaths meaningful. It didn't make the battle worthwhile. It just acknowledged that what had happened in Saragarhi on September 12th was something that deserved remembering. By 5:30 p.m., the tribal force had secured the position and moved on. Their objective was never Saragarhi. It was Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan. The relay station was just the first step. They'd taken it. Now they had to capitalize on it before British reinforcements arrived. They left the dead where they lay. 21 Sikhs. Somewhere between 180 and 600 Pashtuns, depending on which account you believe. The British would later count 180 bodies in and around the fort. Tribal sources would claim far fewer casualties. The truth is, probably between those numbers, and it doesn't matter. What matters is that 10,000 men needed 8 hours and hundreds of deaths to kill 21 men in a stone box. That's the math that turned Saragarhi from a military engagement into a legend. Fort Lockhart, 6 miles west, watched the entire battle through telescopes. British officers documented everything: times, positions, tactics, casualties as far as they could observe. At 5:15 p.m., when the last Sikh turban disappeared from view, they made a note in the official log. Saragarhi has fallen. All defenders presumed killed in action. Enemy casualties estimated 180 to 200 visible. Relief force will depart at dawn. At dawn meant 16 hours too late. But dawn was the earliest they could move without getting slaughtered themselves. The tribal force was still between the forts, still organized, still capable of doing to a relief column what they'd just done to Saragarhi. So the British waited and watched and wrote reports that would later become citations for medals. The sun set over Saragarhi at 6:30 p.m. The fort that morning had held 21 living men. Now it held 21 corpses, 180 more corpses, broken walls, a burned gate, empty ammunition crates, and silence. The heliograph mirrors caught the last light, flashed once reflexively, then went dark. The communication link between Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan was severed. The British command structure in the Samana Range was blind. The tribal force had achieved its objective, and in Punjab, 800 miles away, families waited for letters that would arrive in 3 weeks, saying their sons and husbands and fathers had died gallantly holding their posts in service to the crown. The letters wouldn't explain what gallantly meant, wouldn't describe the sounds or the smells or the fear or the math, would just say, died in action, September 12, 1897, Saragarhi. That was supposed to be enough. It wasn't, it never is. But the men who died there didn't die for enough. They died because that's what soldiers do when the orders are hold and the alternative is unthinkable. They held, all of them, until their bodies stopped working. That's not heroism. That's just the final clause in a contract signed when they put on the uniform. The Khalsa doesn't retreat. So they didn't retreat. The math killed them. But the math didn't make them run. That's what September 12, 1897 proved. Not that courage wins battles. It doesn't. Math wins battles. But courage determines what the math costs. And at Saragarhi, 21 men made the math cost so much that 127 years later, people still can't stop calculating. September 13th, 1897, dawn. The British relief force from Fort Lockhart reached Saragarhi 16 hours after the last shot was fired. 400 soldiers marching 6 miles through territory the tribal forces had already vacated because their work was done. The column arrived expecting a fort. They found an abattoir. The northern gate was gone, burned to ash and iron fragments. The eastern wall had a 10-foot gap. The courtyard was a carpet of bodies so densely packed that the stone floor wasn't visible. The British officers walked through slowly, documenting, photographing, counting. 21 Sikh corpses identified by their turbans and regimental insignia. 180 Pashtun bodies in and immediately around the fort. More scattered in the approaches where the first waves had fallen. The math was visible. You could track the battle's progression by following the body distribution. Distant corpses from the opening volleys. Clustered corpses at the breaches. Piled corpses in the courtyard where the last Sikhs had made their final stand. The British found Havildar Ishar Singh propped against the northern wall, rifle in his lap, eyes open, looking at nothing. Around him, a semicircle of dead Pashtun warriors, maybe 30 of them, killed in the final minutes when he'd run out of everything except the refusal to die lying down. They found Sepoy Gurmukh Singh face down in the courtyard, sword still gripped in his hand, 6 feet from where he'd been shot, proof he'd crawled even after his legs stopped working. They found the others scattered across the fort in the positions where math had finally caught them. A British lieutenant, 24 years old, Cambridge educated, 2 years in India, wrote in his diary that night, "The smell was unbearable, not just death, something worse, the smell of men who'd fought past human endurance and died inch by inch. I've never seen anything like it. I hope I never do again." They laid the 21 Sikhs in a row in the courtyard, cleaned them as best they could, wrapped them in cloth. A Sikh subadar from the relief force performed the final rites, reciting prayers over bodies that had been dead for 16 hours in September heat. The British officers stood at attention. The Sikh soldiers wept openly, not from sadness, from recognition. These 21 had done what every Sikh soldier was trained to do. They'd fulfilled the Khalsa mandate completely, fought to defend, refused to retreat, died with honor intact. That's not tragedy in Sikh military culture. That's graduation. The Pashtun bodies were buried in mass graves outside the fort. No ceremony, no prayers, just labor. The British didn't do that from disrespect. They did it because even enemies deserve burial, and there were too many bodies to do it individually. Some of the relief force soldiers, walking through the courtyard, stopped at certain corpses. Young faces, old faces, men who died fighting for their homes the same way the Sikhs had died fighting for their duty. War doesn't care about motivation. it just processes bodies. The tribal forces had withdrawn before dawn, moving north into the mountains, regrouping for the next phase. They'd accomplished their objective. Saragarhi was taken. The British communication link was severed. Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan had spent the night deaf and blind. That's what they'd wanted. That's what 300 deaths had purchased. From a purely tactical standpoint, it was a victory. From a human standpoint, it was a catastrophe that both sides would remember as proof of their own righteousness. The British response was massive, immediate, and historically predictable. You don't kill 21 soldiers of the Empire without the Empire showing up with friends. By October 1897, less than a month after Saragarhi fell, the Tirah Campaign had mobilized 35,000 British and Indian troops, the largest frontier force ever assembled. The objective was simple: punish the tribes, reclaim the lost territory, demonstrate that challenging British authority carried a price tag measured in burned villages and shattered resistance. The campaign lasted 6 months, cost $2.8 million, which in 1897 money was enough to build 300 Saragarhis. British and Indian casualties, 1,100 killed or wounded. Tribal casualties, unknown, probably thousands. The British reclaimed the Samana Range, rebuilt Saragarhi, reinforced the garrison to 60 men instead of 21, and declared victory. The tribes retreated into the mountains, waited for the British to reduce their troop presence, and went back to being ungovernable. Nothing had changed. The frontier remained hostile. The forts remained vulnerable. The empire remained overextended. Saragarhi proved you could kill 21 men with 10,000 warriors. The Tirah Campaign proved you could burn 100 villages with 35,000 soldiers. Neither proved you could make Pashtun tribes accept foreign forts on their land. 50 years later, the British would leave India entirely, and the frontier would still be throwing foreigners out. Different foreigners, same mountains, same outcome. But that's getting ahead. Back to September 1897, and the question of what to do with 21 corpses that had just demonstrated the theoretical limits of human stubbornness. The British gave them medals. All 21, Indian Order of Merit, the highest gallantry award available to Indian soldiers at the time, posthumous. The IOM was the colonial equivalent of the Victoria Cross, which Indian soldiers weren't allowed to receive because imperial bureaucracy had racist sub-clauses. The system was, white soldiers get VCs, brown soldiers get IOMs. Everyone pretends this isn't apartheid with ribbons. The 21 defenders of Saragarhi got IOMs. It remains one of the only times in British military history that an entire unit received the highest gallantry honor simultaneously. The medals were presented to families at a formal ceremony in Fort Lockhart in October 1897. Mothers, fathers, widows, children, some very young. The British read citations, professional language about conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty and exceptional courage under fire. Words that meant, "Your son died, here's some medal and a pension." The families took the medals, some with pride, some with grief, some with the blank expression of people who've been told they should feel honored when what they actually feel is empty. Ishar Singh's widow received his medal. She was 32, with 3 children under 10. The citation was read in English, translated to Punjabi. For conspicuous gallantry in maintaining his post against overwhelming odds. She held the medal in her hands, looked at it for a long time, then put it in a bag with her husband's last letter, written 2 weeks before Saragarhi, and walked away. She never remarried. raised 3 children on a military pension that was adequate by 1897 standards and insufficient by human standards. The medal stayed in that bag for the rest of her life. After she died, her eldest son, who'd been 7 when his father died at Saragarhi, donated it to the Sikh Regiment Museum. It's still there. Small piece of metal in a glass case with a card that says, Havildar Ishar Singh, 1862-1897, Battle of Saragarhi. Gurmukh Singh's parents received his medal. He was 19, only child. His mother collapsed during the ceremony. His father stood rigid, tears streaming down his face, holding the IOM and shaking hands. A British officer tried to say something comforting. The father looked at him and said in Punjabi, translated later, "You gave my son a rifle and told him to hold a stone box against 10,000 men. You're surprised he's dead? I'm surprised you have the courage to face me." The British didn't respond. What could they say? The math was accurate. The Sikh regiment took Saragarhi and built it into foundational mythology. Within weeks, officers were invoking the battle in speeches to new recruits. On September 12, 1897, 21 men of this regiment held a position against impossible odds and died to the last man rather than retreat. That is what we are. That is what you will become. It became the standard. Every Sikh soldier in every British Indian regiment knew the story, knew the names, knew the math, and knew that if the situation ever arose, they were expected to do exactly what those 21 had done: die standing. That's what medals and monuments do. They don't honor the dead, they recruit the living. Look at these heroes, they say. Don't you want to be like them? The answer is supposed to be yes. Nobody mentions that being like them means dying in a stone building while bureaucrats write reports about resource allocation. But here's the twist. The Sikhs actually wanted to be like them. That's not propaganda working. That's cultural values aligning with military necessity. The Khalsa Code already said, fight to the death. The British just gave them opportunities to do it and called it duty. Saragarhi became the proof that Khalsa principles weren't theoretical, they were operational. 21 men had tested the code against reality, and the code had held even when the men couldn't. That's validation. Dark, lethal validation, but validation nonetheless. The battle echoed forward through every war the Sikh regiment fought for the next 50 years. World War I, Sikh soldiers in French trenches. Remember Saragarhi, graffitied on walls and whispered before assaults. World War II, same thing. Burma, North Africa, Italy, anywhere Sikh troops deployed, Saragarhi came with them. Not as history, as expectation. You're inheritors of men who held against impossible odds. Now go do it again. And they did, over and over. The casualty rates for Sikh regiments in both world wars were extraordinary. So were the gallantry awards. After Indian independence in 1947, the Sikh regiment transferred from British to Indian Army. Saragarhi Day, September 12th, became an official regimental holiday. Every year, ceremonies, speeches, remembrances, the 21 names read aloud, young soldiers standing at attention, hearing about men who died 50 years, 70 years, 100 years before they were born, and understanding that the expectation hasn't changed. The uniform is different, the flag is different, the code is identical. In 2017, UNESCO declared September 12th as International Day of Sikh History, largely because of Saragarhi. The battle had transcended military history and become cultural identity. Sikh communities globally commemorate it. Films have been made, books written, monuments erected. In 1923, the rebuilt Saragarhi got a memorial plaque listing all 21 names. It's still there, though the fort is now in Pakistan after partition. The plaque says, in English and Punjabi, "In memory of the 21 soldiers of the 36th Sikh Regiment who on 12 September 1897 gave their lives in defense of this post." It doesn't say what they were defending. It doesn't explain the British imperial logic that put them there. It just lists names and dates in the word defense, which can mean whatever the reader needs it to mean. Here's the historical irony that nobody wants to examine too closely. Saragarhi was tactically irrelevant. The tribal forces took it, held it for 16 hours, then the British took it back. The Tirah Campaign reclaimed the entire Samana range. By 1900, the frontier was as pacified as it ever got, which is to say, barely. The strategic impact of 21 Sikhs dying was approximately zero. The communication link was severed for less than a day. Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan survived without it. The British response was so overwhelming that the tribal uprising collapsed within months, but the symbolic impact was infinite. The battle became proof of 5 different narratives, depending on who was telling the story. For the British, proof that Indian troops were brave and loyal, therefore imperialism works. For Sikhs, proof the Khalsa Code is real and dying for duty is righteous, therefore we're warriors. For the Pashtuns, proof that resisting occupation is possible and foreigners bleed like anyone else, therefore fight. For military historians, proof that courage doesn't overcome mathematics, therefore tactics matter. For nationalist Indians after 1947, proof that British used colonial troops as cannon fodder, therefore imperialism was exploitation. All 5 narratives are partially true. All 5 ignore the most obvious truth. 21 men died because the British built a fort they couldn't adequately defend and staffed it with however many soldiers the manual said was sufficient. The manual was wrong. The men are still dead. The medals exist. The story survives. The math that killed them doesn't care. What Saragarhi actually proved is something nobody wants to admit. Last stands make great stories and terrible strategy. They're celebrated because they let us feel things about courage and duty and sacrifice without confronting the system that made the sacrifice necessary. 21 men held for 8 hours. That's extraordinary. It's also pointless unless it achieves an objective beyond buying time for forts that didn't need the time. Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan were under attack simultaneously. Saragarhi, holding or falling, didn't change their tactical situation. The defense was heroic. It was also expendable. But here's why the story survives when thousands of smarter tactical decisions are forgotten. Because sometimes the point isn't winning. The point is proving that math doesn't determine meaning. 21 men couldn't beat 10,000. They couldn't even survive. What they could do was choose how they lost, fighting or running. Standing or fleeing, honored or ashamed, they chose fighting. They chose standing. And 127 years later, we're still talking about it because somewhere deep in our primate brains, we understand that choice matters even when the outcome is predetermined. That's the universal truth Saragarhi teaches. Not that courage wins battles. It doesn't. Not that duty justifies sacrifice. It doesn't. Not that empires are worth dying for. They aren't. The truth is simpler and harder. When math says you lose, the only freedom left is how you lose. Die running or die fighting. Both end in dead. Only one ends in legacy. 21 men chose legacy. The legacy is, they were here, they held, they died, and the math had to work for it. The modern world has complicated feelings about that. We're suspicious of military heroism now. Aware that dying for duty often means dying for political decisions made by people who'll never see combat. We're right to be suspicious. But Saragarhi isn't asking you to celebrate imperialism or war. It's asking you to witness what happens when culture meets mathematics and refuses to submit, even when submission is rational. The Khalsa Code said, fight. Math said, you'll die. 21 men said yes to both and let biology sort it out. Time has been kind to their memory and cruel to their reality. The memory gets ceremonies and films and UNESCO recognition. The reality was 8 hours of escalating horror ending in young men dying slowly in a stone box full of smoke and blood and the certain knowledge that nobody was coming. We celebrate the memory because it makes us feel things about human potential. We ignore the reality because it makes us feel things about human stupidity. Both are true. History is the gap between them. September 12, 2024, 127 years after Saragarhi, Sikh Regiment headquarters in India held the annual ceremony. Young soldiers, 18 to 25 years old, standing at attention while an officer read the 21 names. Havildar Ishar Singh, Lance Naik Chanda Singh, Sepoy Gurmukh Singh, down the list, all 21. Then the officer said the same thing officers have been saying for 127 years. These men set the standard. We maintain it. What he didn't say, the standard is dying when ordered. That's what maintenance means. The empire that ordered the original deaths is gone. The forts are abandoned. The frontier belongs to neither Britain nor Pakistan nor Afghanistan, but to people who've lived there for thousands of years and will live there thousands more. The only thing that survived was the story. And stories are just mathematics with emotional weight. 21 men times 8 hours times 10,000 enemies equals a legend. The formula works. The men are still dead. Witness this. One more time. A 19-year-old signalman cleaning heliograph mirrors while smoke choked his lungs and his brothers died behind a wooden door. He had a choice: save himself or stay at his post. He cleaned the mirrors, made sure the next message would transmit clearly, then picked up his rifle and died in a courtyard doing what the Khalsa Code said he should do and what military logic said was pointless. The math said he wasted his life. The legacy says he proved something about human will that mathematics can't calculate. Both are true. History doesn't resolve that contradiction. It just preserves it in monuments and medals and stories told to young soldiers who'll face their own impossible math someday and have to choose how they respond when the numbers don't work. That's Saragarhi, not a battle, a test. 21 men took it. 21 men failed by surviving. 21 men passed by dying. The grade was posthumous. The score was permanent. If you made it this far through 2 hours of history, math, and brutal truth, do me a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. What would you have done? Run while you could, or clean the mirrors? There's no wrong answer. There's just the answer you'll have to live with, which is more than the 21 got. Next time, we're covering another impossible choice in another forgotten war. Turns out, history is full of moments where courage meets mathematics and somebody has to decide which matters more. Spoiler, the math always wins. The courage is just how we frame the loss. Until then, remember Saragarhi, not because it was glorious, because it was true. 21 men held a stone fort for 8 hours against 10,000 enemies and died to the last man. The empire gave them medals. History gave them immortality. Mathematics gave them nothing but the inevitable. That's the price. That's the legacy. That's what happens when faith fights reality and both sides refuse to blink.